Hi, so today we have with us Sanjoy K. Roy, who's written There's a Ghost in My Room, Living with the Supernatural. Hi, Sanjoy.
Hi, Manjula. How have you been? Thank you
I've
for
been
having me on your
okay.
podcast.
Yeah. So, Sanjoy, everybody knows you as this cultural impresario and who does the Jaipur Lit Fest and who's, taking it abroad and, does all these events, these grand events. But so I was quite surprised that you've written about, your experiences with the supernatural. And of course, it's a memoir and it tells the reader about your life and about your business ventures. But the supernatural bit, let's start with it. How do you think, like, why, what? Everybody isn't on that frequency. I mean, when I read your book, I thought, uh, everybody isn't on this frequency. So do you want to start with why are these things happening to you, and are they really happening? Is it a figment of everybody's collective imagination? All those things. Now I shouldn't talk, you should say. you know
So, Manjula, pretty much, like I said, when this first incident happened when I was 5 or
ah
or thereon, it's not that one was aware that anything was different. Yeah, an incident happened. I used to freak out, but it used to be what it is, and one sort of took it in one stride. And looking back today, in many ways, writing this memoir has also been a great healing process because obviously there was scar tissues in many of these cases which needed some healing. And in that process of writing and remembering, I actually was able to perhaps heal some of the memories that I have talked about. But why does this happen and how does it happen and why does it happen collectively to Punita and me and sometimes the kids? I mean, who knows? Except that, yes, each time it happens, by and large, one still jumps out of one's skin. But as we were told, so Punita is a healer and I attract dark energies. And I suppose it's something that one has got used to, still not comfortable in my skin about it. It's not that, eh, as and when I see a ghost, I think it's cool. I think the only two really cool ghosts that are in the book are, the only two times that I haven't jumped out of my skin was once up in Gatia when Madame Durel
Mhm.
came visiting, and then once in Spain where, I thought the housekeeping person had come through the door and was standing at the alcove because, I wasn't sleeping in this case. I was still pretty much awake. And then as I looked at the person, sort of, I sat up and looked at the person saying, "Can I help?" kind of thing. And then I realized that the person didn't have any hands. And then as I sort of, my gaze went down, I realized, there were no feet. And then when I went back to focus on his face, I realized there was no neck. But in this case, I mean, unlike most cases where I typically jump out of my skin, it was a very, he was looking at me, or what I thought was a he was looking at me, and I was looking at him. And, it was more curiosity rather than any kind of whatever. And he sort of hung around, I thought to myself, should I put the light on? Should I not? Maybe, there's something that he needs to convey. And I turned my head away looking for the light switch, and then he had disappeared and then landed up on the other end of the room. But it was one of the few incidents where it was okay. It was an observation, so to speak, as opposed to, oh my God, there's a ghost in my room. Most of the other incidents have been, oh my God, and me trying to jump out of my skin and being totally, totally terrified. And by and large, that still is the immediate instinct. So it's not that you get used to seeing these other things. I mean, sometimes when it's ectoplasm or as they call it, an orb hanging around on your ceiling. I mean, that's you can be dismissive and say, bugger off or whatever. But barring that, it's always been, yeah, challenging.
Mm. But the general populace, or maybe I'm just assuming, doesn't see these things. Okay, I mean, we assume that we are very rational and we do, and everything has an explanation. But when I was reading your book, I was thinking, uh, this is actually happening to you. I mean, especially that scene where you're talking about your son, your younger son, bleeding and all that. That's very frightening, very, very frightening. Straight out of a horror film. You want to talk about that? Very
And
good.
happening, in this kind of case, if it happened once, it's a different matter. The point is it kept happening. And that's when, and we kept taking him to doctors and, Dr. Pargal, etc. And didn't seem to be any obvious reason for it to happen. And this waking up in the middle of the night and shrieking and us seeing all of this blood. And, it was really Madhav when he came to see us. Madhav himself was, very caught up in the occult in some sense. And then he told Punita, say this prayer to Ma Kali every day. And then
Mm.
over a period of time, that sort of went to pass. So it's not that we started off as believers of this kind of stuff. But the funny thing, Manjula, since the book has come out, everybody who comes up to me, I was on a flight yesterday coming back to India. Everybody who comes up to me and whoever's picked up the book seems to have a story, a similar story to share. And there are so many people who've turned around and said to me, fairly famous people who've said, you're very brave to write about this. We've had similar incidents in our homes or whatever. We've never had the guts to repeat it because we think people will think we are mad. Now, that's not something that's ever occurred to me as to, I mean, I may be mad and anyway think I'm mad, so it doesn't really matter to some extent. So I didn't have anything to lose on the mad bit of it,
Hmm.
but it is a thing. I mean, is it real? Is it scientific? Is it whatever proven? It's, it's my reality or Punita and my reality in many cases because we've sort of shared so many instances and so much of it has happened which is not left to just me or her. It's been shared
Hmm.
experiences. And even today, sometimes, in the center room upstairs in our home, on the second floor of our home, on the first floor of our home, our elder son is often experienced somebody come, a lady, and sit, when the mattress sort of depresses, and with a particular perfume. And then, of course, they come to our room saying, she's back or whatever. Who are these people and why are they there? Very difficult to fathom. But these messages or instances of messages that I seem to get randomly. Yeah, I'm not hugely comfortable with it. And I find it sometimes really problematic to be able to relay a message. Can you imagine meeting somebody who you don't know from Adam or Eve in a situation and you get this message saying, she has whatever, um, a cancer or she has a heart thing or whatever. When you know somebody, it's easier. So I remember I saw Mani Suri coming down the steps and I said to her, your knees are very red. What's happened? And she said, oh, yeah, well, this XYZ. But how do you say a same kind of thing to somebody who you don't know? And Punita
Yeah.
used to keep saying to me, it's not for you to edit the message. You're being given a message. It's your responsibility to convey it. But I'm not comfortable with that. So I'm like, oh, have you been or whatever? And why don't you, I get around to the whole thing. Have you been well? And when was your last checkup? And why don't you go and get your checkup done? That kind of thing. But the thing is,
Hmm.
when it comes true, like it did in this case of this lady who had cancer, or a lady who nearly I mean, she didn't realize that her arteries were clogged and she was visiting from Canada or wherever. Except that they then think that you know everything, before and after, which I don't. It's not that I'm a, what do they call it? When you do
A
before.
medium.
I mean, I'm not. I mean, I don't see myself as, and I'm certainly not interested in being, and I get a message, I sometimes I convey that, and that's it. It's not that I can read Janam Patris or I can whatever. I mean, it's none of
Hmm.
that. So it still sits somewhat uncomfortably with me at some level because despite this being so many years have passed, it's something that's, yeah, that I'm not wholly comfortable about.
Hmm. But I mean, if this is the case, like you should never be making any unwise business decisions. Does that happen?
The funny thing is, Manjula, because at some level, I suppose I'm such a skeptic as well. So, say I'm
Hmm.
driving through traffic and my instinct says, make a left because you're going to get into a traffic jam. I will inevitably sort of challenge my instinct and, do what the logic or Google Maps in this case, says to me.
Hmm.
And invariably, land up in a jam or whatever. So at that very basic level. But when it comes to work and business, you're absolutely right. I tend to follow my instinct pretty much. So I'll give you an example. We were setting up a festival in Scottsdale in Arizona, and
Hmm.
everything had been done, with the Scottsdale Center of the Arts, money, sponsorship, everything had got sorted out. And then I just had our partner, our local partner said something to me. And I just had that instinct of, this is not right, and I walked out. I said, I'm really sorry, but I don't think we can continue this
Hmm.
partnership, and, apologies and blah, blah, blah. And I have followed that instinct in so many cases. Even when we've been given fairly uh, good offers by, say, government or other corporates, etc., have come to us and said, do this for us or do that. One has
Hmm.
always followed one instinct about walk away or don't walk away. The Commonwealth Games was one such example where, because we had done the Commonwealth Games closing for the Arts Festival in Australia for the Australian government, there was a
Hmm.
lot of pressure here by the then Sheila Dikshit government, why don't you do A, B, C, D, E, F, G? Or I think it was Suresh Kalmadi at that point of time, who was heading the IOC. They wanted to do the torch relay in the UK, and we were a deemed organization. But I was just not comfortable, and I told my colleagues that yes, what they're offering is great, and we really needed the resources on hand, but no can do. So one is
Good thing
dependent,
too.
no can do. Yeah, one is dependent on that instinct. I try to make sure that there's a rationale behind
Hmm.
it as well now, more and more, because obviously, when you're a large organization like this, what do? You can't just be quirky all the time and be saying,
Yeah.
I think. So I leave most of the decisions anyway, my colleagues take. But it is something that I follow in terms of, which way to go.
Okay. Okay. So how did the seed for this book, you know, emerge?
So, Manjula, through the last few years, so many publishers have come to me saying, write about obviously Jaipur and the
Yeah.
journey and all of this. Exactly what you said. I thought
Yeah.
that's what you're going to be writing about. And I was like, oh, please, yeah, who's interested in me writing about, what happened and all of the stories? And that will find its time, but it's not right now, because that's a really complicated story with a lot of stuff that, may be controversial. Uh,
Hmm.
when I tell it, because every year there's been stuff, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I was not so enthused about that, and I remember many years ago Renuka Chatterjee sitting me down in Habitat Center. I think this is even before she was in her latest space, and I think she was in that Neville Tully's organization, whose name I forget for a
Okay.
second.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And she said, I really want you to do this book on food because, you're such a wonderful cook, blah, blah, blah. And that's also always sort of stayed with me. But I remember more recently, I think the Bloomsbury folks came to me and said, I thought they were coming to me to talk about, programming for Jaipur. And they said, no, we really want to take you out for lunch. And they took me out and said, we really want you to do a 3-book deal. And I'm like, 3-book deal? I'm a reader. I'm not interested in writing. And I really, I love reading. I don't do television. I don't really do films. what I do is reading because I love reading. I read all
Mm,
the time. I read 5, 6 books at a time. And
mm,
but I've never seen myself as a writer like Namita or William or Tarun or anybody else. And so when this sort of cacophony of thingamajig grew, I reached out to Himali, who I love and trust. I said, Himali, please, please tell these people to bugger off. I can't do any writing and stuff like that. I'm not a writer, and I've never written. I mean, I've written chapters on policy and stuff like that, but that's about it. I'm
mm.
certainly not ready to tell, and anyway, who's interested? Why should anybody be
Ready?
interested in my story? And
Mm,
then she and Ranjana sat me down and they said, no, 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 why don't you seriously consider this? Because, these are serious offers and you're in a unique position, all of the blah, blah. And then I said, well, why don't I just write about my encounters with ghosts? And they were
mm,
like, what a wonderful idea. And that's when I started writing. And because my schedule is so complex, any
mm,
given point of time, I just wrote on flights, which is the only me time that I had. So it took
mm.
away from my book reading time, but it so I used to sit on flights and write. And initially, because I've always felt, like an editor, and anything comes to me, I try and always edit it down so that you're not
Yeah.
doing fly and blue and blah blah blah. And so in my first few chapters, that's what I did. I used to, read it and re-edit it and cut it down. And then finally one day Ranjana said, why are you doing this? Just write. You know,
Mm,
the writing process, this is not a press note you're writing. You're writing a story. So, you know, so write about it. So in many ways, with that advice, the Calcutta chapter, which is now the first chapter. So
yeah.
that the first chapter I attempted without cutting it down, meaning less is more, but I let the story flow
That's a good chapter.
and then went back to the rest of it. So like I keep saying, I'm an accidental writer. I'm not a writer. I never set out to be a writer. I don't necessarily pitch myself that, oh, here's a literary masterpiece or whatever. It is what it is. And in fact, just before it was going to, when the edit had been done and Udayan had done the last lot and sent me the last draft and all of this kind of stuff, I called Himali and I said, Himali, listen, let me just give them back their advance. Nobody's interested in this kind of stuff. I mean, forget it. And who's interested? I mean, I'm not interested in my own writing. Why should anybody else be interested? And she was like, don't be silly, and then Udayan and they really babysat me and said, no, it's a nice book. Don't worry, you know, go for it and stuff like that. So pretty much till publication date, I was like, you know, क्यों लिखना है, क्यों पढ़ना है, कौन पढ़ेगा, and why is anybody interested? But interestingly, like I said, I mean, what we will do is I'll do an anthology post this because so many people have come to me, Manjula, with so many of their stories and
Mm,
some even more frightening and some interesting. And then you begin to understand or realize that like you're saying, what happened, why is it about, meaning why me in terms of,
yeah.
but it's not. I mean, there's so many people who live in these or certainly experience these other energies that exist. Now
Mm,
we've called it, or we give it a title of ghosts, or we superimpose the thing of ghosts. But I look at these more as energies that exist or
mm,
coexist with us. And in
mm,
many ways, like the Buddhist philosophies or the Indian philosophies, that, we're on a continuum of time. So in many
yeah.
ways, the soul sort of, can go back and forth in some sense because
Mm,
you're in this continuum of time and you can revisit and look at it as we do, I suppose, in many ways. And as the book will tell you, it's only when Punita started, uh, when the Karmic Research Center began and she began working with her ascended master, did we start actually making sense of some of this. Otherwise, it was all so random. Chalo bhoot dekha, or this one came, or that one, whatever. We never made sense of it. But when the Khajuraho incident happened, and we saw
Mm.
Punita sort of, levitate and do this sort of
It's
wave-like
really happened.
in
And you
front
see,
of us.
many people
All
were
of
there.
us were, all of us were there. The lights were on. We were in a meeting, and then we saw this. Obviously we all freaked out because it happened twice. It's not that it just happened once. And we had to sort of, lower her, and not knowing is she in this, sleeps like deep state. Then all of this other grandmother's tales come to being. No, don't disturb anybody in the midst
Yeah.
of this process. They shouldn't be alarmed. You should come, all of this kind of stuff kicks in.
Mm.
But the fact is that it's freaky. And then all
Yeah.
of us, I think, in some ways, while you never really get used to it, eh, you get used to the fact that not everything is in the ordinary.
Yes. Yes. For somebody who's like very rational, or tries to be rational, I when I started reading the book, and you say that ESP is real. Yeah, I can, I mean, one accepts that yes, it is real, and you've experienced it, but then you go on, and you're actually very brave to talk about these things, because it's very easy for people to say this is crazy, and because we all tend to be, look at the rational side of things and not venture into this bit. So you know did it occur to you that, I mean, you did say that people anyway think I'm mad, but even otherwise, like, maybe did it hold you back at some level?
I don't know whether it held me back, but I tried to. I mean, one of the things I kept, one of the editors, the original editor, kept saying, spice it up, and I'm like,
Spice it up. It's spicy enough.
yeah, I'm like, but that's not the experience. These are things that happen pretty much in an everyday context. You know what I
Mm,
mean? It's not like I say, it's not that the ghosts in Valley of Kings or Queens sort of popped up and did ghostly things. Most of them are fairly ordinary incidents,
mm,
except that because we're conditioned to respond in a particular way, you freak out, as I do. I mean, when you
mm,
see something that you don't, in your rational brain, is not the ordinary, you
mm,
do freak out. And even today, I freak out. What do you do? And I was
mm,
very clear right from the beginning to Himali and Ranjana and Udayan and everybody that what I don't want to do is make this like this whole sensational, ghostly
mm,
thing, because it wasn't. It's an
mm.
incident that happened. It's like the poltergeists, the happy poltergeists in Edinburgh who used to steal the keys, or Lindsay Pita, whatever. I mean, it's what it is. And then
Mm.
Punita sort of ticking them off, and then everything being returned is like whatever, or the pirate in Suneva Fushi.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a contained island. Everybody is accounted for. Nothing ever gets lost. It's a, 7-star amazing property. And there my juttis are gone. I mean, really seriously.
This pirate wanted duties, must have been.
I mean, can you imagine? I think it was because of the red in the, it was very piratey looking, my Janota juttis. And my hurt was primarily because Janota had closed down because of COVID and
Mm.
GST. I mean, because of GST and then COVID. And they weren't making the juttis anymore. So this is my really precious. I was really not a happy not a happy bunny at all.
Mm. Now, coming to Punita, at one point you say that, like somebody says that the wife takes on the karmic responsibility for the husband, you know. So talk about that. I found that really fascinating, you know.
So our elder son gave me a real lecture when I said this at the book launch, Manjula. He said, "That's such a misogynistic thing to say. How could you have said it?"
Mm.
But again, this is not me saying it. This
Mm.
is the person Khopri, I call him Khopri, is the face reader, Shastri ji. And he was like, and even as recently, Manjula, is 15 days ago, we were going to Canada. And he came to me and he said, "Do not take Punita to Canada. She shouldn't be traveling." I said, why? I said, she's fine. Since she had her, I mean, in April this year, she had meningitis and encephalitis. But
God.
but we've traveled since then to Spain and London and stuff. And we were going, and I didn't want to make a big deal of this. And we went, and she fell really ill, and she passed out. And now we're still dealing with it because she's got all sorts of now new stuff that's emerged. But so it's the same guy who's, it's not, do I take everything that he says seriously? No, I don't. Occasionally, in retrospective, when he says something, then it sort of strikes you like this, like the June 6th thing, that it came to pass in this particular kind of way.
Mm.
And in each of these times, he's always said that, the only way that you could have been protected is for her to have willingly taken on this karma. Otherwise, if it had happened to you as it was meant to have, then you would have been whatever beyounged, or you'd have lost some aspect of it because of the severity of the whatever the dosha, or the alignment, etc. Now all of this sounds really mumbo jumbo, and
Yeah.
yeah, and Anubhav Nath, are from 1AQ Ojas. He has this amazing chart reader who stays in, I don't know, Bangalore or Kannada or someplace in the south. He can give you a longitude, latitude alignment of what you should be doing, where, etc. So one day he had fixed up this session for me, and this guy does a 2-hour sessions and charges, I think, $15,000. But in like 45 minutes, I was like, meaning, does one really believe and want to know? Well, I don't. Then I left Anubhav to ask the questions, because anyway, my Hindi in these instances are less than comprehensible, and most of the time I can't even make out what they're trying to say to me. So
Also, if you follow such charts, I mean, you can't do anything now because you'd be stuck in that, wouldn't you?
then I mean, how do you do any, like you said, if everything is ordained, which of course
Yeah.
they say that it's not, because you're always given a choice. If you do
Mm.
this, this will happen. If you do that, that will happen. But the choice of free will is pretty much the universal rule, that
Mm.
this is the path, but your free will can be, you can do good or bad, or not so good or not so bad, or what. But it's your choice. and
Mm.
and the reminder that, at least in Indian philosophy, and I'm saying Indian philosophy as opposed to Hindu philosophy, because the Vedas never sort of said A or B or C. It's pretty much the fact that we didn't have a concept of hell or sin.
Yes.
You did.
Yes.
We only have a concept of karma. The
Yes.
idea of dharma, etc., came much later. It was
Mm.
primarily karma. What you do at some point of time will come back to visit you. And
Yeah.
it's something that, you've done to somebody in this life, or past life, or future life, or, all of this that gets connected in a continuum, which in many ways is, I keep saying, the only reason there's never been a revolution in India is primarily this, because we all position
Yeah.
ourselves in our karmic, this things subconsciously, even if it's not,
Mm.
and
Mm.
we're okay with the lot that we sort of given. But it's weird, right? In many ways, that you are living in an ordained way, which is being supposedly controlled by the planets hanging around some place, the sun and the moon, and then through the influence, and then you can deter or enhance the influence by wearing a stone that's connected to one of this, be it pearl for moon, or you know
Mm.
quartz, or whatever. And even I mean, all of the fellows who come to see me say, you wear this or you wear that, and I'm like, seriously? Is this something that I'm going to do? No way. Because
You end up looking like a sadhu baba if you do everything.
yeah. And also, I suppose, because we've never been brought up like that in many ways, Manjula, to be only steeped in this. Of course, my mom
Mm.
was the family druid, and we come
Mm.
from these very steeped families that have this sense of identity, which is all of this combined.
Mm,
And none
mm,
of them look at this as unusual.
mm,
Like my mommy, for example, who I mentioned in the book, for her listening to this tinkling of the piles of the goddess was never unusual, or
mm,
listening to the hark playing in the courtyard in the courtyard downstairs was never. It's not that they freaked out or they questioned,
mm,
but they came from a belief system whereby the goddess is an embodiment of and is as real as you and I. But you
mm.
and I have not necessarily been brought up
Yeah.
to believe that because we're not in that context. We have,
Yes.
we don't live there anymore. We're not in that context. So, in our somewhat divorced context, in our more primary, non traditional homes, we question, ki, acha, seriously? And,
Mm,
what the hell?
yeah. Which is why it's surprising that opened yourself up, you know. Hmm. So, how long did it take you to put it all together? Was it like,
So I've been writing, like I said, I wrote on flight. So the first draft I must have sent in. Um, well, I mean the first or second draft was sent in last October, not
oh,
1 year ago. So it took
mm,
me about 2 years in the making, maybe, to be able to, first do the first draft, then go back, do the edits that Ranjana had suggested. Then they pitched it to the publishers, then it went through that process. So there was a hiatus, and then in March again, March through to June of this year, I
mm,
spent in whatever rewriting, fact checking that needed
mm.
to be done, etc. Because in each of this has also been some amount of research, right? So when I
Yes.
talk about Jerusalem, and in all of that, I'm like, when the University of Valladolid sent me all of the English translated papers that they have at the university, I was like gobsmacked to read about the persecution of this group of, ascetics. Uh,
Mm.
you
That's
know,
in the Spanish chapter, right?
that's in the Spanish chapter. Or, for example, in Jerusalem, doing the research about Mishkanot Shanamin to realize, okay, this is actually, the valley of the orchard of Moses or whatever. And because even when you're told stuff like this, it's like, seriously, you don't expect to believe it, and you don't
Mm,
expect anybody else to believe it. And I
mm,
didn't believe it. I was like, don't be silly. I used to tell Puneet that, whatever, tell Gurudev, I mean, this is just can't be. I mean, and why and what? And my hysteria at that point, I don't know whether you read the Jerusalem uh,
yeah, I read it.
thing. My hysteria at that point was I was just panicked that the same thing was happening to me that had happened to me in Rishikesh, that it was going to be
Mm, mm,
possessing. Except that in Rishikesh, it wasn't this. I mean, in Jerusalem, it was a very physical possession, meaning, whatever this energy
yeah.
was pressing itself. I'm not using the word rape, but it was certainly pressing itself into me in a way that I can't even, really explain because it was so horrific at one level. And it's only when I sort of gave in, uh, you know, and whatever it was that it entered me, did the situation change, and I was able to jump out of the bed. So it was so, yeah, horrific. And
Mm,
then to be told, actually, it's cool, and it's this whatever. I'm like, seriously? I mean, maybe you could have let me know or asked my permission or, had a conversation or whatever you needed to do. I mean, this
mm,
was in many ways rape, not that one has experienced it outside, but
mm.
was.
Tell me, when I was reading those chapters, Jerusalem and the Spanish thing, and even Edinburgh, you know, these places with a history of great violence. You know, I mean, one has read about how it kind of leaves traces. And so talk about that. Is that what you were sensing?
So even if you look at Sabdajang Enclave, Manjula,
Yes,
or Sabdajang Hoska SDA thing,
yes.
which is built on the graveyards of warriors and everybody who's been put to rest or on battlefields or whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, in Sabdajang, one experienced it every day. Even
Mm.
if we didn't experience it, our Punita's colleagues, because her office was, on the floor above our residence. I mean, for them to see headless people or whatever, or clanking of
Hey,
chains.
they really saw headless people.
Yeah, I mean, hanging around behind the door. So, they used to freak out. And we used to sort of, try and behave ki, this is cool. But not everybody thinks of these things as like it's
Yeah.
okay and cool. So it really, in many ways, I think it drove poor Lenny to drink. But anyway, that's a different story. Um, so as you said, places of unresolved happenings, because all of these are really, I mean, when you look at these other energies who hang around, it's because they, as they say, and this is not me, as they say, because they haven't gone into the light, whatever that light may be, and they have hung on. And
Mm,
I mean, one made sense of it. You remember the chapter in where there's this accident at the Jorbag Lodi Road crossing,
mm.
the hit and run accident. There's this
Yes.
car that hits this bike, and we stop because we're behind it. We see this guy somersaulting, and of course, his life force ebbs out in front of us while we're waiting for the cops and the ambulance. And when I woke and I had this really angry red energy standing, glowering at me, and Punita back home in Gurgaon obviously had fallen. And we had to say to that person, hey, it wasn't us. We were there, we were trying to help you, and we're very sorry. And then Punita had to be able to send them light, because what happens is when you suddenly, I mean, what they say is when you have an accident like this, and then you don't know, you're confused because you have nowhere to go to. Your own body is now not responding. You're
Mm,
left in this completely state of confusion and anger, and whatever the last thoughts you may have had, like the girl, for example, from the Upahar tragedy that Punita and Urmila had called in. They have no idea how to deal with it. And
mm.
because they have no idea how to deal with it, they're not able to progress as other people do into the light. And then, they're then lost. They're in this semi space, etc., an unresolved space, perhaps. And that's the issue, and so these disembodied beings, for the lack of a better word, um, or energies, then hang. And in this case, they hung around on the people tree outside our bedroom. And when we finally moved, I can't tell you what a relief in so many ways it was not to have all the ghouls and all of these people hanging around. But again, the fright when I first in our new house, when the imprint of the hands on the steamed mirror showed up again for the first time, I'm like, oh gosh,
Not again.
they've, they've followed us. Doesn't matter that the whole new construction. And then we were told, no, these are your spirit guides here to, protect you. They're not the baddies. They're just here to protect you. And then you take that in your stride and you accept it. And, it's okay. I mean, in recent times, I haven't seen their imprint anymore. So, maybe I don't need it. Like that, again, that's what they say. Your spirit guides are there when you need them, when you
Mm.
need to be helped and assisted and you're in need of stuff. So, yeah.
But this thing about Punita using that planchette or whatever, that was really reckless. I mean, again, as a person who's doesn't, it never touches all. I don't even watch horror films. Okay, So, and I try to be rational, but this, I would never do this. This is like very frightening. Why would she do that? It's very reckless. Mm.
Totally. I mean, I used to be so, and I banned them from doing. I said, you cannot do this, call all of these, you know, energies and then leave them because you don't know how to resolve that. And then I'm having to have this conversation with whoever it is. I'm like, who are these people? And why are they sort of in my space? And yeah, I used to get really, really very cross with them.
Mm. But why, have you ever wondered why is it that they appear to you? It's not a normal
Manjula, the
situation.
funny thing is, I have very acute hearing. So if, you know, even when, say, we all check into a hotel, my colleagues try and give me the cornermost room because I can hear 4 rooms down the line, middle of the night when they're pulling the flush, you know.
What?
Or Tarun will tell you, in their wherever house, if something happens 2 rooms away through thick stone walls, I can hear the conversation. So maybe it's in some way connected to the fact that I have this extremely acute hearing. So even when I listen to music, so if Punita and the boys or we're traveling together and they put it up at X volume, I have to put it down like 2 or 3 notches
Mm.
because it's too loud for me. Like my laptop, for example, is on half volume in terms of the output. Yeah,
Mm.
because it's an overload. So maybe that's one of the things that I'm able to hear a frequency that's somewhat different than everybody else,
Mm.
more animal-like, perhaps, for the lack of a better example.
Mm.
And this being able to sense, I remember when one went so for many years, I refused to be part of this whole journey. I used to, Punita used to go, I used to say, great, do whatever you have to. It's not for me. And then finally, when I went to their center, to the Karmic Research Center, and their Transcendent Master said to me, तो आ गए, uh,
Mm.
इतना देर लगा. And then he said, आपका antenna, you know, you need to get your antenna tuned, so go and do Reiki. So, Sharupa, me, Dilip, all of us, or some of us, we went off to do Reiki with Adarsh Puri, which I talk about. And that sort of tuning the antenna at some level. Uh, so then didn't become random anymore after that. Earlier, it was to be fairly random. Now it became far more purposeful when people came to, or these energies came to, you know, give me a message or say something, etc. But like I said again, am I comfortable with this? No, I'm not. I mean, and by and large, I try and still, block much of this, because it's not something that I have an interest in, if you know what I mean. I
Mm. Mm.
don't
You don't
have a,
seek it out.
I don't seek it out, and I don't have an interest in tuning
Mm.
myself to this as a cause,
Mm.
because I'm just still so uncomfortable with my rational mind and whatever. Maybe as I grow older, etc., maybe it'll change, but as to date, I still find it very, very challenging to be in this position. And
Mm.
why do they come to me? Maybe I suppose they also have a sense of who gets them. And therefore, they go to those people who they think, has a sense of what they are or who they are or what they need. And yes, while I, send them into the light, it's really most of the time I'm telling Punita, send light to this one or send light to that one. Or, recently uh, our eldest son and his partner shifted home to a new home in Goa. And Tara had got some furniture from her aunt in Uti or Kunur. And I sort of said to her, I said, Tara, there's a cupboard, and this is what the cupboard looks like. Is there a cupboard like this? And she said, yes. Is this it? I said, yes. I said, please don't take it into the house. Or there's a lazy chair, please don't take. So it's not just, I mean, the reason I'm saying this, what I'm saying is it's not just about people and energies. Everything has an energy, and
Mm.
everything absorbs an energy. So typically in any horror trope, it's that cupboard, the door, or the basement, or what, these are
Creak.
tropes. But
Yeah.
in actuality, when one, in the process of writing, I started understanding the pattern, which I
Mm.
didn't earlier choose to know about.
Okay.
So like I said, for me, really writing this book has been both a process of discovery, uh, but healing in so many different ways.
Mm. And from the book, one gets a sense that your younger son also has something like this going on, right?
Well, he because they are rationalists and they've sort of pretty much negated this, so they push away
Yeah.
from it and find instances, etc. It's really Aditya, our eldest son, who has this. I mean, we all have this sense of energy. Avik tends to be far more rational and has an argument about why or what or which,
No,
etc.
I mean, as a child, I meant, he was.
Of course. I mean, he doesn't accept that his horror of red, I mean, he doesn't go anywhere near. If somebody brings ketchup, he'll get up and walk away. He won't touch it's that to that extent sort of imbibed, but he looks at it as a phobia, but not necessarily with a background in what
Mm.
had transpired.
Mm.
Or uh, uh, one of the things that apparently I haven't put into the Narkanda chapter was that it was Avik who points to that other wala gandi wali across the mountain, which is how we see it.
Oh,
Yeah,
is
which
that
I have.
what happened? You didn't include that.
I didn't remember it, but after I wrote it,
Mm.
Aditya was saying that that it was Avik who pointed out that temple. So I'm,
Gosh.
you
So,
know,
as a rationalist now, how does he deal with you people, talking about these things?
I think we all, I think we all live at different levels or different whatevers at different points of time. And I think that's because we are all who we are. And, we've always been, I mean, we see ourselves as liberal. And I'll give you an example. I remember Aditya, I think it was Aditya during the Gujarat riots, who one day came across and said, what religion are we? So Punita and I gave those ones of, oh, by accident of birth, you are X, but you can choose what you want. All of this claptrap kind of stuff, new age funda. And then he said, no, no, are we the ones who are burning, or are we the ones who are being burnt?
Oh my God,
Literally.
that's terrible.
But within that rational mindset and the fact that, they see their grandmother and, in our Cal home, my paternal, we've redeveloped, it's a apartment block now, but there is a room there that's, that has other energies which nobody stays in, because places imbibe energies at different points. And then it's a question of how do you deal with it? Do you deal with
Mm.
it in this, we have to get an exorcist or or whatever, or this is not right, or more like we do, which is, yeah, I mean, they're there and we're there, and if we all coexist in whichever way, that's okay.
Mm.
Then that liberal sensibilities sort of kick in, that we may not understand, as we don't, the
Yeah.
other dimensions, but it's not that they don't exist because we can't scientifically prove it either which way. So it's okay.
Yeah,
It's
there's
okay.
so much we don't know, right?
Yeah, there's so much we don't know, and there's so much. It's like ESP, again, death. it's not that my grandmother was ill, but I just knew that I wouldn't see her when I was in America. So I made it a point to fly into Cal, see her, and then fly to America. And she passed.
Mm.
Not that, again, not that she was ill, she was not ailing, nothing. But you get an instinct, or when I used to leave and my mom, because she had a heart thing, I used to tell her, Mom, if you're going to threaten to die between this period, remember, I'm not coming to your funeral. So you figure it out. you know. And I really prefer that you do it on a weekend. And remember, it has to be scheduled. And we need to really make sense of this and don't do stuff that the funny thing is, so she fell when I was in America. I was in JLF or wherever I was, and anyway, I flew back, and Punita and my brother and everybody had taken her to Medanta, where she had always told us, don't put me on a ventilator. That's something that I don't want to be. And I had said to her before I left that I'm coming back on the Thursday, and it
Mm.
was the early mornings of the Friday that she passed. And my brother, before leaving, because I told our eldest son, I said, if my brother's in the hospital, she won't pass. So we sent him to bring him back at about 1 o'clock at night. And as he was leaving, he told the nurse that between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock, you please make sure that somebody's inside this room and blah, 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 blah. And she passed at 3:30. We got the call.
No.
you know so again, so how do you rationalize some of this? Or when you're thinking of somebody and you've got you get a call saying A or B or
Yes.
C, which happens a lot of the time.
Mm.
And some nights when I'm restless and I wake and I tell Punita, I think A or B or C person has came to visit or whatever, has passed. So how do you rationalize that? So it's difficult. You accept it, meaning because there's no explanation. Now then it's a thing of like,
Mm.
oh, matlab, blah blah. You can
Yeah.
make much drama, or you can
Mm.
say, acha, it is what it is, and we don't know everything about the way the world works, which we
Mm.
don't.
Yeah. Another thing I liked about the book, at least the initial chapters, is how you kind of your father's role in the liberation of Bangladesh and all that, and also the time, and the whole thing about growing up in Delhi, and at that specific in the 70s and 80s. That's very nicely done. It's really nice. It gives an insight into a different time, which I mean, it's not written about much, right? This whole that period, maybe because it's too close, and now people are just getting into the phase of life when they are remembering those times. So that was also a nice aspect of that. Maybe I don't know. Later on, you can write more about it. I don't know. So
Yeah, I mean, when and if I ever do my biography, obviously all of this there's so many stories waiting to be
yes.
told, which I haven't told in this book because, this is a very specific memoir on ghosts. But yeah, I mean, but to a large extent, Manjula, that whole thing about throwing a bomb out of a limousine, wrong reference today, of course, given what's been
Yeah.
happening. But in a lot of the time, at least through my university days and early whatever, I was pretty much rejecting the background that I came from. I mean, I was
Hmm.
always uncomfortable with this sense of privilege that we had because
Hmm.
of what one saw around us. And Deepthi Mehrotra has written a new book on protests and theater and stuff like that. And we were all part of we were all part of this street theater company. And we used to see the horrors of bride burning and dowry deaths and, extreme poverty and all the work that I was anyway working with street kids, etc. So there was this huge contrast on
Hmm.
the life that you saw around you and the place where you came from, the privilege that one came from. And I used
Hmm.
to be very, very uncomfortable. And in fact, the funny story, Supunita will tell you the first time when she asked me, so what does your father do? So I said, he works. So she thought, he must be something, and he's embarrassed. He doesn't want to talk about it. And then because I hadn't gone home for many years, my parents said, okay, let's invite the theater company TAG to come and perform. And so, when we arrived at the station, we were all traveling third class or whatever it was. And we got off, there were all of these people there to receive us. And she said, who are these people? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to know. I don't know. And then because they were going to stay in the house and everybody else was going to stay in these other guest houses. So when we drove up to Navy House, she was under the impression maybe that we were going to the annex behind and whatever, not realizing that, when she saw, and my mother standing on the top of, this very high, this thing of steps, sort of shrieking as to now what has our son brought home, and when running to tell her husband, you won't believe what he's done now, kind of stuff. But also the fact that they were always so supportive, Manjula. I mean, for
Mm.
me to be on hunger strike or dharna or be in jail or be arrested, and my dad having to travel out to come and bail me out or pick me up from whatever strike I was in, take me to the gymkhana, make sure that I had my chicken sandwiches, had a bath, and deposit me back at whichever this protest strike was, taking the flag off his car, so that it
Mm.
was unmarked or whatever. I mean, for them also, it must have been a real uh, shock to the system. But then my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, ran away from home in protest when he was 9. I mean, ran away in the sense of, somebody to do tie and shoe and stuff like that. But ran away, went to Japan, and from Japan, because he didn't like the food, went off to America, joined the Ghadar party. And he was also a great, he was somebody, gave away all his lands as part of the freedom struggle, and
He
so on.
joined the Ghadar party.
Yeah, so
Oh,
when he went
wow.
to Vancouver, I mean, that's what he went as part of, to join the Ghadar party, went to California, studied in all of these places.
What was his name?
So his name was BK Roy, Bijoy Kumar Roy.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And then the other day we found, when we were moving, when we were redoing our, or demolishing their home, we found this clipping from 1904 which said, high caste Brahmin goes on an expedition to the Amazon, with a photograph of him, dressed like, dressed like, what's his name? Ramakrishna,
Oh.
whatever, and robes. And he goes on an expedition to, so maybe because of that, my parents were like, okay, this is a phase, and, blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
But, credit to them that they never, they sort of bore it with some equanimity at some level.
Yeah, right. So this book, this anthology that you're gonna work on next, tell us about
Yeah,
it.
because, there's so many people who've come to me with all their stories, so I'm going to compile them. I think there's a telling there. Again, to
Wow.
give people a sense of, hey, it's okay if you have these experiences. It's
Hmm.
about, it's really about that.
Hmm.
That it's okay to have these stories, and, that you've shared them, and some of them are really quite something.
As in frightening and like,
Both frightening, unusual, visitations, ancestors,
hmm,
all of
God.
it, going out there in advance of your time, being sent back, all of this kind of stuff. So, it's out of body experiences, um, you know, being saved from, I mean, the chapter which is on Bali and New York and stuff. I can't tell you how, I mean, how do you, 3 times we were headed to Kuta, each time there was an intervention. And
Yeah.
for no rhyme or reason, or even New York, which was the most possible harmless.
Yes, that's a Darji coming and saving you. My goodness, out of
Literally,
nowhere.
from in the middle of Harlem with not a human being anywhere. What was a cab doing there? Careering down empty in New York at that time to pick me up,
Hmm.
and a Sardarji, and, stopping and saying, what do you think you're doing, kind of stuff. I mean, where? How? These
Yeah.
are also, we don't think about it again. But I keep saying, if you look around, you see a miracle every second. It's just that we're not tuned to seeing these as miracles. But if you do choose to, the miracle of life around us is quite extraordinary. Except that we're so busy, oh, this happened to me, or that happened to whoever, or I don't have this, so I want my next Nike, or whatever it is that we want, Apple. So
Mm.
we don't sort of, we're not tuned to look at the wonder of the
Yeah,
world that we live in, or the wonder of our bodies that
that's
we
true.
inhabit. Every second that it ticks over, I mean, we're having a conversation. I mean, can you imagine
Mm.
how these memories there, and the just the memories, Manjula, during the Nirbhaya thing,
Mm.
uh, um, the assembly rooms in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Festival, and we collaborated on this play, Nirbhaya, on producing it, which we also brought to India. And I was sitting there the opening night, and that play was really about 5 different women and this one man telling their stories. It wasn't necessarily about Nirbhaya, but their stories of whatever. And just sitting there, this obviously this deep-rooted memory, which I didn't know even existed, of when I was kidnapped, popped into my head. And I'm like, oh my God, I thought, meaning I didn't even remember that I remembered that I, whatever, but it's
Mm.
always been there, and then where do these memories sit? And when do they pop out? And how does that then impact anybody's mental health? So you and I may be fine, or as fine as possible, but then what about others? So how do you look at this as the mental makeup that we are all part of? And some people not so in the sense of the way we perceive it, and some people are able to deal with it. So these are, fascinating things to think about.
Yes, and on that note, we'll end. For the listener, go out and get There's a Ghost in My Room, Living with the Supernatural by Sanjoy K. Roy. It's a really interesting book, actually. And I didn't expect it to be like this because I really expected it to be something else. And then I was quite surprised. So thank you for talking to me about it.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you so much for reading the book and taking this to your listeners.
Okay, bye. See you.
Bye. See you.